do you actually believe that we can ever be in a utopia, or that we have ever been in a utopia? Is utopia even possible? And also, if you could give some context to the literary context to where the word utopia comes from.
So now you're putting me on the spot to remember my Utopia lecture. Um, my memory, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it came out of, I forget if it was Latin or Greek, for no place. That there was some notion of it not being able to be attained. Um, One thing we talked about in class, Joshua, that I'm sure you remember, so but let me kind of talk about it a little bit, is this notion of change. That the one constant in the world, in human evolution, in existence, is change. That as soon as things become static, they die or they end, or something bad happens when change stops happening. I th- I would have a hard time saying that utopia has never existed, but I would also have a hard time saying it's existed for any extended period of time. There may have been utopian periods that were an instant where in a certain society where things were really perfect for, and maybe it was an hour, maybe it was a week, maybe it was some brief period of time. But just kind of like any, you before used the analogy of the car, right? To use it in another sense, that car is going to run perfectly for a little while, and then the fan belt's going to break, right? Or then the tire is going to lose air. Like there are forces which are dependent on constant change, that are going to what provide problems, obstacles, derail things. And so I guess my response would be, as candidly as I can, to say, I don't think it's possible for a sustainable utopia to exist. I think there are probably moments I'm sorry, this sustainable utopia to exist. I think there are probably moments of utopia that have existed in smaller settings. And maybe the smaller the setting, the longer it can exist. But I don't think, I just think the change and the erosion and all of those things are, they're operating again. And it gets to kind of one of the things we talked about the first week of class, that in some ways utopia is this conception of perfection, right? And so you can strive toward it, and you can get close, and maybe for an instant you achieve it, but to kind of stay in that place, I think is problematic. That said, you've also raised this notion of e-utopia, right? Which is, I don't think, as I understand the definition, I don't think it is perfection, but I think it is this kind of self-sustainable, recognizing its own flaws, but better than any other system kind of arena, which I think is very interesting, thought-provoking, worthy of exploration. And my only concern on a large scale would be, again, and we already talked about this, how do I get those who are above that place to agree to lower their status to be a part of that place?
Interesting. So in response to the very last thing that you said, I think that can be done if we didn't have the zero sum game mindset, right? If obviously, like, if someone, regardless of where I am on the status, the scale, was to say that, okay, give up what you have, right? Like, you lose and someone else wins, I'd say, hell no, I'm not doing that. That's not happening. I want to win, right? There's this whole notion that we're conditioned in society to win, right? To be positive, to grow, right? So obviously, I don't think our human mind would ever want us to lose and for someone else to win at our expense. But that being said, if we could create a positive sum game where, yeah, you're on top, wherever you are, doesn't matter. We're not saying you need to lose. We're not saying you need to give up what you have, but rather that you grow, but also the others grow. And I believe that can, again, that sounds quite idealistic. I believe that can happen by bringing about a shift more in our economic system. And I'm not an expert on economics, but one of the other students that we had in our class, Alex Canade, who's also been on this podcast, talks a lot about this economic change and how we can create a sort of economic system where we can create more win-win situations. where people on top don't need to give up their power, but rather, and it's not a completely flat system. It's not extreme equality, because equality in extremes can also turn dystopian. That was another story I was really fascinated with. Just side tangent to mention it. I was really interested in the idea of equality and, justice. And I used to often think about equality and justice as the same. But after reading that text called Harrison Bergeson, I think it was called.
Bergeron.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
And how there was extreme equality, right? Like that could also turn dystopian. So I don't believe that we need to create a system that's that's eradicated capitalism or hierarchies and gone to the extreme, like like communism or, complete flat egalitarian systems. I think there's a middle ground, like everything else. I think we can create what I've learned as hierarchies, which are essentially like hierarchies, but they're dynamic, they're fluid. They're not stuck the way hierarchies are stuck in. So there is a hierarchy, but anyone can be on the top at any time. And there's equal opportunity. There's no forced equality that you must be where I am and I'm lower, so you must also be at where in the same position and as me and give up what you have. But rather that, no, me on the bottom, I have the opportunity to get to the top. And I know that could sound like, oh, the American dream, anyone can be rich, anyone who's willing to work hard can climb to the top. That was sort of the utopian dream that the forefathers of America had presented. And like you said, we might never be able to be in that sustained utopia, right? Like permanent utopia. And I don't even know if we should even think about permanent utopia, because if we have all the time feeling good and no time when we're feeling kind of shitty, then will we ever know the value of good? Will we ever know sort of what good feels like? I'd argue no, at least I wouldn't. When I really have those really shitty moments, or like when the electricity went, that's not a shitty moment. When the electricity goes off, for example, I get to know the value of light. That, okay, like, thank you for there being light. I wouldn't know the value of this if I never saw the other side. And so that's why I think that the other, or sort of the dark side, is also important. Yet I believe we can sort of create this utopia, or this ever improving system, rather than a perfect system that's sustainably or like perfect all the time. Instead, like, it's getting better, yet it'll never be perfect. And that's the concept, that's the base of the system, where the point is to keep on getting better rather than trying to just be perfect.